Hello everyone, welcome back to another canto of Orlando Furioso. Today we're going to talk about canto number 10, which is probably one of the most important cantos of the entire poem, because it has a central place in the plot, because it has a couple of scenes that are most widely represented and painted and illustrated across all the countries where Ariosto Furioso has been translated. I'm talking about the scene in the second part, and it's really very rich overall, very rich. So I'm gonna try and do a quick summary, but before that I really wanted to read a very short passage from a letter that one of the most important characters of in real history of the Italian Renaissance, Isabella d'Este, wrote to Ippolito d'Este, who had been Ariosto's boss for a few years. The letter is dated 1507, and it's used by literature experts also as a proof, as a documentary proof of the fact that Ariosto was already working on Orlando Furioso in 1507, while it was many years before the first edition came out, was published. The Cardinal Ippolito d'Este had sent Ariosto to visit Isabella in Mantua, and after that visit, after that meeting with Ariosto, she wrote back to Ippolito that she had derived the greatest satisfaction from the recitation of the work that he is composing, which made the last 2 days pass not only without tedium, but also with the greatest of pleasure. So it's very interesting to imagine these moments where Ariosto spent time with Isabella d'Este, a very powerful woman of those times, and he obviously charmed her. He charmed her a lot with his wit, with his very funny personality, and with the funny lines and with the funny stanzas that he already had written for Orlando Furioso. Who knows, maybe she even inspired him to change a little detail here, a little detail there. But I found this really fascinating. So Canto 10 begins speaking about love, in particular young love, young and passionate love. In fact, we have left the plot at the end of Canto 9 with this great wedding that's been organized between Bireno and Olympia, and they seem to be very much in love. They have done a lot of adventures and efforts, the two of them, in order to live together. However, as Ariosto says, and by the way, in this video and the next ones, I will try to put the subtitles whenever I read Italian verses. So I will try to add the Italian words as well, so that it's a little bit clearer. And if I can, I will also include the English verses, the English translation, so at least it can be a little bit more useful. This comes from a conversation I had with Frank, so thank you, Frank, for your feedback and suggestion. So at the end of stanza 4, Ariosto says, Io vi vo dire e far di maraviglia, stringer le labbra e inarcar le ciglia. You're going to tighten your lips and arch your eyebrows because of what I'm going to tell you. What he's going to tell us is that Bireno is not in love with Olympia anymore, because he's already passed on to his new love interest. In particular, the beginning of stanza 7 seems to be not a condemnation, but a very clear statement about young love for everybody. How untrustworthy is the young love. He compares it to a fire made of hay. So the first lines of stanza 7 are guardatevi da questi che sul fiore. Ariosto is speaking in particular to women here. His specific audience is women. Guardatevi da questi che sul fiore, de lor begli anni il viso han sì polito, che presto nasce in loro e presto muore, quasi un fuoco di paglia, ogni appetito. And then in a sense he doubles down on this concept, but he's also correcting it and softening a little bit the blow for his female audience in stanza number 9, where he says, non vi vieto per questo, ch'avrei torto, che vi lasciate amar. Please, be loved, let yourself be loved. This is no sin, this is perfect for you. Che senza amante sareste come inculta vite in orto, che non ha palo ove s'appoggi o piante. Sol la prima lanugine vi esorto, tutta a fuggir, volubile e incostante, e corre i frutti non acerbi e duri, ma che non siano però troppo maturi. Stanza 9 ends with a real punchline, which is, yeah, okay, be careful not to pick the fruits that are too young, too immature, but be careful not to pick them when they are too mature either. The King of Frisia has a daughter, and she is very young, she's 14, and she's been promised now to Bireno's brother. However, Bireno, who is in a very successful moment of his life, he sees her and he gets a crush on her. He likes her more than Olympia. And with the excuse of the grief that she has for her father, Bireno spends a little time with her. And in Italian, in this terrible stanza number 14, Ariosto says, E se accarezza l'altra, che non puote far che non l'accarezzi più del dritto, non è chi questo in mala parte note, anzi a pietade, anzi a bontà gli è ascritto. Nobody realizes the nasty purposes of Bireno with this girl. The translation here it risks losing a little bit of strength because in the beginning of stanza 14, Ariosto says accarezza, which means caressing. Some translators have used the word embrace, so Bireno is embracing her, and he's embracing her more than what it would be proper. And I think Barbara Reynolds actually uses the verb fondle, which it might be even stronger than what Ariosto is saying here. This is also another canto where Ariosto is increasing and intensifying his classical references and the intersection of his writing, his plot, and the world of classical myths. Many different classical myths are quoted here. One example is at stanza 20, the myth of Alcione. She was the wife of the king of Troy, and she committed suicide by jumping from a rock in the sea. And the gods then transformed her body and the one of her husband, who also died out at sea, in birds, in flocks of birds. This type of approach by Ariosto, this type of strategy, literary strategy, to use and to source a lot from classical myths, is very typical of the humanism period. And we remember that we can say, I personally believe that humanism began with Dante, but it's arguable. But really officially, humanism started a little bit around the midpoint of the 15th century, so right after 1453, with the take of Constantinople by the Turk Ottomans, where most of the Greek scholars moved from east to west, and many of them arrived to Italy, and so slowly and gradually kicked off or kickstarted the Italian Renaissance from a cultural standpoint, because all of those Greek books and texts, including Aristotle, including Homer, were not present in Italy before that. So there was a huge, not only analysis and conflagration of cultures in this period, but also an assimilation, a harmonization between the classics and Christianity. For example, and this is a perfect example, the stanzas 20, 21, and 22 of Canto 10 are very directly sourced from Ovid. In fact, if we go and look at Ovid's poem, the Heroides, in particular Book 10, as a coincidence, we're going to see exactly the same scene that Ariosto is describing here between stanza 20 and 22. I'm going to read a very small passage from Ovid so you can see how similar it is. What Ovid is describing is Ariadne screaming to Theseus, who's left her on the beach. This is precisely exactly what is happening to poor Olympia, and what Bireno, in a very cruel way, did to her. So here is Ovid. It was the time when the earth first sprinkled with glassy frost, and the hidden birds lament in the leaves, waking uncertainly and stirring languidly in sleep, half turning, My hand reached out for Theseus. This is Ariadne speaking. There was no one there. I drew back and tried again and moved my arm across the bed. No one there. Fear broke through my drowsiness. Terrified, I rose and hurled my body from the empty bed. Straight away my hands drummed on my breast and tore at my hair, just as it was on waking from my confused sleep. There was a moon. I looked and saw nothing but the shore. Wherever my eyes could see, there was nothing but sand. I called Theseus over the whole beach, your name echoing from the hollow cliffs, and as often as I called you, the place itself called too. There was a hill, a few bushes were visible, a crag hangs there, hollowed out by the harsh waves. I climbed it. Courage gave me strength, and I scanned the waters, and then I saw your ship driven before a fierce southerly gale. And then she goes on describing her reaction, the fact that she tries to wave at the ship precisely like Olympia does in Orlando Furioso. Now, after stanza 35, we go back to Ruggero, who is traveling towards Logistilla. He wants to find the kingdom of the palace of Logistilla, who is the good sister, and this part is very allegorical, so it can be read really with different layers. You can read it as simply the adventure plot, but it does have specific characters that signify specific concepts. And so when, for example, Ruggero finds these three ladies on the beach, these three ladies who are offering him a little champagne and a little bit of restoration while he's walking around in the heat, they represent still the vices that are still on offer and they're still available along the way towards your maturation and your virtues. Then in stanza 52 we have another good example of allegorical images. Giunte son quattro donne in sulla spiaggia, quattro donne, this time four women, che subito ha mandate Logistilla, Andronica, Fronesia, Dicilla e Sofrosilla. And they represent the four cardinal virtues that come from the classical world. For example, in Dante we have the four cardinal virtues and the three theological virtues who belong to Christianity. Ariosto decides to focus only on the classical world here and only on the four cardinal virtues that are represented as follows. Andronica is fortitude, Fronesta prudence, Dicilla justice, and Sofrosina is temperance. In fact, Sofrosina is said here to be the most important one because it's mainly with the help of temperance that Ruggero will be able to save himself from the vice of incontinence and lasciviousness. After a great battle, Ruggero is able to finally get into the palace of Logistilla. Logistilla is a great guide for him, almost like a spiritual guide, because she teaches him many different things, and one of the most important ones is how to ride, how to control the hippogriff. The ability for Ruggero to learn to control the hippogriff really can be read as Logistilla teaching him to control his instincts and to develop spiritually, to develop his virtues. Here is fascinating how Ariosto talks about Asian locations, some Chinese locations as well, with a certain familiarity, and we wonder kind of how could he be familiar with those type of locations. One of his sources was certainly Il Milione, the travel book that Marco Polo, another Italian, had written about his journey to Cathay and back. In fact, not only one journey but different pieces, and that's Il Milione is a big important part of Italian literature. So what Ruggero does at the end is, if we combine his first trip on the hippogriff with this second trip back to Europe or back to England, he basically has circled the entire world and come back to the beginning. Rinaldo, as we know, has been preparing a lot of the English armies. He's been working through the diplomatic ways to help Charlemagne in Paris. And from here, Ariosto starts listing a lot of different English groups and English powerful politicians. Some of them historical, some of them not. But we modern readers don't really care too much about them. And we get to stanza 90, where finally the greatest scene of this canto. I say greatest because it's such an incredibly strong action scene. You cannot peel your eyes from it. When Ruggero sees Angelica chained on a rock, se non vedea la lacrima distinta, fra fresche rose e candidi ligustri, far rugiadose le crudette pome, e Laura sventolar laurate chiome. My favorite stanza out of this long scene of battle against the sea monster is stanza number 105, which goes: Simil battaglia fa la mosca audace, contra il mastin nel polveroso agosto, o nel mese dinanzi o nel seguace, l'uno di spicche e l'altro pien di mosto. Negli occhi il punge e nel grifo mordace, volagli intorno e gli sta sempre accosto, e quel suonar fa spesso il dente asciutto, ma un tratto che gli arrivi appaga il tutto. Towards the end of the canto we realize that nobody, even virtuous Ruggero, is really completely safe from falling in love with Angelica. He has a very lusty behavior because right after she is safe, he brings her on his hippogriff in a secluded place, and we leave him at the end of the canto in a very ridiculous, unflattering scene where he's trying to take off his armor as quickly as he can so that he can have her, Angelica. And so we'll see what happens in the next cantos. For now, thank you so much for watching, and let me know what you think about Canto 10 and if you have some favorite stanzas from this incredible canto. Bye.